Kia ora. I'm Bruce Munro. With me is International Relations Specialist Professor Robert Patman, and this is Global Insight. What risks are looming on the world stage here at the start of 2019? Professor Patman will give us his top 3 concerns from a New Zealand perspective. Welcome, Robert.
Good morning, Bruce.
What should we be concerned about?
I think in terms of the pecking order, I'd like to start with number 3 first.
Sounds good.
The least threatening, but still nevertheless a significant one, is the ability of New Zealand to effectively respond to the changing physical nature of our environment, i.e. planet. And that's a bit of a worry. We're seeing, for example, extreme weather. We're seeing declining levels of fresh water in New Zealand, which is a worry. And we're seeing, of course, rising sea levels in the region, the Asia-Pacific region, which New Zealand is a part. So I think we are being affected by these global trends. And the big worry is whether we're responding quickly enough to take adaptive measures to combat some of these trends.
Some might say, so what if we're dragging our feet on this? We get plenty of rain, we've got undeveloped spaces, we're not a low-lying atoll, so why should we worry?
Well, your question's a good one, because we are probably better placed than many other countries. But we also, at the stakes of our country, we're an agricultural exporter. We're critically dependent on a certain degree of stability in terms of the climate. And I think the other thing is we have is a bit of what I call a self-image problem. That is to say, we have traditionally, and with some justification, seen ourselves as clean and green, which means that we're probably slower than other countries to recognise these signs of decline in our environmental picture. And I think this is a real concern, particularly on the freshwater front, where now international authorities have expressed concern, for example the UN, about the fact that compared with the pristine condition of our lakes and rivers only 50 years ago, we've seen quite a fast rate of decline. So I think these are things we've got to keep an eye on, and hopefully we'll become a little bit more proactive in 2019 in combating it.
What's number 2 on your list of threats facing New Zealand?
Number 2 is how New Zealand can navigate its relationship with the world's 2 most powerful countries, the 2 superpowers, namely the United States and China. We have good relations with both of them, but I suspect that both of them want to align New Zealand more closely to their view of the world. New Zealand is in the position where it does not share the worldview of the Trump administration or the Xi Jinping administration in China.
So you think that we can manage to hold hands with both the United States and China?
Yes. Can
we do that without becoming a doormat, or is a doormat a good option for us?
No, a doormat's not a good option. And in fact, we would diminish our leverage if we tried to appease one or the other. That's my argument. We maximise our attractiveness and our leverage if we're seen to be friendly, but not on any one side. In a sense, as relations between China and the United States become ever strained, we might act as something of a bridge builder. I don't want to exaggerate New Zealand's diplomatic clout in this situation, but I think it would probably be the worst of all worlds to side with one of the 2 when relations between them are tense. I think what we've got to come across is an honest broker, which is a good friend of both, and one which a country which is quite capable of robustly defending its interests and values. Remember that New Zealand has, quite a different approach to human rights and the rule of law to both the Trump administration and the present leadership in China. And it's important we don't lose our way in the process. The other thing to keep in mind here, Bruce, is that the US and China are not the only shows in town. And by maintaining that balancing act, we are maximising our options outside the US-China relationship. The relationship with Japan is rapidly developing, and we're developing close links with other countries which are covered by the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
What do you see as the greatest threat then that we'll face this year?
The greatest threat, I think, is the crumbling or the steady erosion of the international rules-based order known as the liberal international order. And I think, in a sense, we've just identified 2 crucial problems facing New Zealand, problems concerning the environment and also great power relations. But unless we have an international rules-based system, we cannot effectively deal with either of those problems. So New Zealand, since 1945, has been consistent in its support for an international rules-based order. Rules are there to defend the rights and the values of the weak, not the strong. And the extension of the rule of law is very important for New Zealand because it enables, for example, in the trade area, us to defend, trade with more than 150 countries internationally. So this is very important. We are seeing threats to the rules-based order. We're seeing threats externally from authoritarian countries like Russia with its activities in the Ukraine, from China with its activities in the South China Sea. We're seeing threats to the international rules-based order internally from the likes of Brexit in Britain and from the rise of the Trump administration, the election of Donald Trump. And Mr. Trump has posed all sorts of questions about institutions which are critical to New Zealand, such as the WTO, the World Trade Organization. And on top of that, not only is the rules-based order facing internal and external threats, there's also what might be described as a nexus between the internal and external threats. We're seeing this, for example, suspicions of Russian interference in the 2016 referendum in the UK over Britain's membership of the EU. We're also seeing this with growing evidence of the Munro investigation into Russian collusion in the American election. So what can New Zealand do in this situation? I think it must get together, it must reach out to like-minded liberal democracies, but this involves not just defending the status quo. I think it also involves tackling problems which, if you like, the nationalist populist forces have been exploiting. What sort of problems we're talking about? Well, mainly inequality. There was a report this week that the 28 most rich billionaires in the world, between them, have more wealth than half the world's population. That's not sustainable in the long run. It's in New Zealand's interest and that of the majority of countries in the international system to try to make the international economy work better for more people. This is a very difficult task, admittedly, but it won't be solved if we don't try and tackle it. And clearly that's a big, I think, imperative for New Zealand with other countries.
What do you see as the risk if we don't address this?
Well, I think one of the risks is that we may see a continued rise of demagoguery, authoritarian regimes as people lose faith in democracy, and also what I call populist solutions where politicians make no attempt to deal with the facts. And we've seen this in the United Kingdom, we've seen this in the United States, where politicians basically have been elected on promises which are very difficult to deliver in practice. I think what's very challenging for New Zealand here, Bruce, is that it involves New Zealand actually undergoing a diplomatic paradigm shift. Traditionally, we've always been a very, conscientious member of the international community, a good international citizen, but we've traditionally looked to the United States and Britain to lead in sustaining the rules-based order. But we can no longer look to these leaders now. And that means that New Zealand has to look to Canada, other liberal democracies in the EU, Australia, other like-minded countries to, in a sense, bypass the superpowers and defend our interests. And I think one of the key things that needs to be tackled is that we need to create a world in which the global economy works better for more people. And I think a lot of states do believe that. Another area where New Zealand needs to move from being a passive multilateral player to an active one is in the area of security. At the moment, we have a situation where New Zealand, a number of other countries, wants to reform the Security Council. It's been, of course, blocked by those 5 members of the Security Council which have the veto. They don't want to give up that privilege. And there's no signs they will do so in the near future. But there is the possibility that New Zealand and other like-minded countries, and here we're talking about the majority of countries in the world. We often get fixated with great powers, but we in New Zealand often forget that the majority of states in the international system, close to 190, are small or medium-sized countries. It's up to the majority to put pressure on the UN Security Council for the veto to be constrained, so that the UN Security Council can become more relevant and less dysfunctional in a world where there's all too many tragedies, such as Syria.
Thanks, Robert. It sounds like it's an important and challenging year that we've got coming up.
I think so.
And thank you for watching. Catch us next time on Global Insight. Just revido.